Dr. Scalise here with Felicity Financial Solutions and Foster's Accounting. Today we're taking a brief look, hopefully, at what is a fiduciary, but specifically, I want to speak about it from a little bit more academic stance and then try to move into how it applies to you as an investor who's trusting your fiduciaries, maybe your financial advisor, maybe your investment advisor, maybe your insurance agent, um, maybe your banker. My doctorate did have as a major segment of it ethics and worldview. So, understanding the relationship between ethics or morality, what's your moral code or your moral web of beliefs, and how that ties to your underlying worldview or fundamental beliefs about reality is another way to say worldview. And we don't want to get too academic here in the clouds, but we do want to say this is an important topic. There's a huge amount of discussion in both finance and academia, and importantly in the testing booklets for any of the series tests typically have a little subsection on ethics and what is ethical performance and so forth. It's prescriptive, which is also to say deontological, you shall or shall not do this. But probably more importantly, it is ill-suited for really creating let's say a fiduciary in true moral capacity, simply because the type of work and energy it takes to really understand one's own moral framework and how that's tied to one's personal history and fundamental beliefs is not an easy thing to do. Not saying everyone out there has to go get a doctorate and write a dissertation related to these topics, but the point is that a discussion with your financial advisor and their particular moral code and how they perform their financial fiduciary duties is relevant to every moment of the day that you're trusting them with your assets. So let's get right into this definition, and we'll see what we can uncover as we explore this topic. A fiduciary is a person or organization that acts on behalf of another person or persons to manage assets. Number one, typically it's frowned upon to use a definition to define the word seeking to be unpacked or explained. So they should say, it is a person or a person acting on behalf of another person or persons to manage assets. That's what a fiduciary's, tasks are. Now, obviously, they need to be acting to manage those assets beneficially or to make them grow and to protect them. Those would be the standard thing. And of course, along with your other investment policy summary prerogatives. So for instance, you might say, well, I want them to generate income. Well, then it would be in line with your desired prerogatives. So your fiduciary would, make sure that they are generating you income, protecting your capital, and potentially growing your assets if that's part of your financial objectives and your investment profile. Now, anyhow, so here's the thing, but we really need to be careful here because I guess acting on behalf of somebody else's assets beneficially is not always simply to grow your particular wealth. It may be in most cases whenever it's limited. The fiduciary is limited to only those things, but it could be, for let's say you have a guardian who's a fiduciary taking care of a trust, and there's a young person, and maybe you have, quite a few investments in what are called sin stocks or what have you, and it's generating income in this way. But maybe that young person's personal convictions about fossil fuels, not that fossil fuels are sin stocks, but the point is maybe that young person's beliefs about the planet and so forth are contrary to the guardians and the trustees' decisions about what to invest in. Am I acting on behalf of that person's benefit in this case? Well, if we limit the discussion to merely I'm growing their money, period, and we say that our moral responsibility stops there, then yeah, I am succeeding in that. But if I say it is to grow their wealth in a morally responsible way that is accountable to the beneficiary of the trustee, which may or may not be the case. Obviously that's going to differ from trust to trust and guardian to guardian to trustee relationship. But the point is, or excuse me, the trustee to beneficiary relationship. The point is, though, is there a moral obligation there to consider that person's well-being, namely to uphold their beliefs in the way that they invest their assets or their future assets in this case? So that's a major question, and it's not to be overlooked. And so obviously we want to have a fiduciary is, let's say, morally committed, not only to their own beliefs, but to understanding the belief of their clients so that they can uphold those beliefs in the way that they manage their money, whether they agree with it or not. And that's very important, as we know from political discussions, whether you're on the right or the left. Bias and bigotry is rampant on both sides. The type of depth of bias that we've been seeing in recent years on both sides is remarkable, truly. And I want you want your fiduciary, your investment advisor, financial advisor, firm, what have you, to be able to overcome those, let's say, subtle or their underlying biases so that they invest the money in the way that you see fit, rather than basically playing tyrant with their belief set to make your money serve their beliefs. That's a very dangerous thing, and it's subtle. You may or may not see that. You may or may not know it if you're not paying attention to your account, and it may or may not be important to your fiduciary. And if it's not, why not? Why is it unimportant? Now, if your only objective is to grow your wealth, let's say you're just the only point that you have is to maximize your net worth, then these questions are irrelevant. And as long as the asset manager's numbers are good, then they're good. I'm always skeptical, though, that people's moral code stops there. I think most people, if they search, think that they have, underlying beliefs and so forth. And a lot of people will take their money and grow it, maybe with whatever asset manager, and then use their money once it's grown to pursue their moral objectives, even if the asset managers maybe investment decisions are contrary to their own particular moral code. Strange, though, why, if they're your funds, why you wouldn't just communicate that with your fiduciary. And if that fiduciary has a structured and committed moral code, they will go with your prerogatives, or they'll discontinue the relationship. Those are the only two respectable decisions. Essentially, a fiduciary, continuing with our definition, owes to that other entity the duties of good faith and trust. So a person performing fiduciary capacity owes or is obligated to the other entity or person the duty of good faith and trust. So the notion here of good is probably the idea of being committed to that person's enduring benefit financially, and perhaps respecting whatever moral prerogatives their client has as well in the way that they invest the money. That's a really big way to put that, but the word here is good faith. So faith in Greek is the word pistis, and it's strange here a little bit that they have good faith as a phrase and trust. Pistis in Greek, which much of our moral discussions have come from the Aristotelian ethics and Platonism from ancient Greek. Pistis can mean trust, trustworthiness, and faith. But good faith is probably this notion of taking up the concerns of the client, whether they are moral or only financial in terms of how they want their money to be grown and their risk, et cetera, and to have supreme commitment to the benefit or pursuing those objectives of the client, and setting their own biases, history, underlying worldview aside. Now, the question is here, does your fiduciary have an underlying worldview that respects the freedom of opinions and positions that oppose theirs? Because if they don't, they may or may not continue to pursue assets that you find feasible and that align with your particular worldview and moral beliefs. And of course, that would be a violation of their fiduciary duty. They must take up, to some extent or another, the client's concerns for how their money is used and invested, and even to the denunciation of their own, or they have to not take on the account. If a fiduciary is merely interested in growing their firm's accounts and the amount that they manage so they can get rich, then their underlying fiduciary capacity has been violated already, because their whole objective is to basically represent the client's desires, needs, goals with their money. And that's what a fiduciary fundamentally means, is essentially to put those clients' needs above your own financial needs. And so if you're taking on accounts, let's say which you own your financial firm, and you'll take on any accounts as long as their net worth's big enough, whatever, and then that way our accounts can get bigger, we can all get paid more. Then essentially you're putting your supreme greed, in some sense, or self-interest ahead of your client's prerogatives, because the client should always be first, with little or with much money, their particular views and positions. So good faith here, again, has something to do with the supreme commitment. And so does my fiduciary, does my investment advisor have a supreme commitment to respecting contrary points of view? A very important question, and many people do not. So take the political debates, right or left. I think I hear a lot of talking points, but I see very little discussion towards actually trying to understand one another's views, and unpack those in a way that maybe can progress the discussion. Not to say that I stand above it. I certainly don't. I'm not an elitist. I just see it for what it is, and I recognize that the lack of humility there and leads to talking past one another. And so, if you're going to trust this person with your money, let them be supremely ethical, supremely moral. And a great indicator of that is, can they understand and will they take the time to understand contrary positions, worldviews, etc.? And can they, denunciate, at least for the purpose of managing your assets, their own particular agenda to be able to elevate yours? A very good question for your investment advisor. Ask it next time you see them. And then it says, and trust. A fiduciary owes to another entity the duties of good faith and trust. Trust here, again, is the Greek word for pistis, and probably it should be changed to trustworthiness. So does that person exhibit trustworthiness? And the test of this, obviously, is when I give them instructions in my IPS, your investment policy summary, you, the client, give instructions to your investment advisor or other fiduciary. Do they take those instructions seriously? Do they communicate on a regular basis with items that may be a conflict of interest? Do I see the investment advisor regularly taking time to understand? Let's say you have a particular section or subsection of the economy that you want to focus in on. Does my investment advisor show interest in researching that and communicating that interest to me? These would all be ways to establish trust, and they are the way that we come to say, like, this fiduciary is trustworthy. They have to, number one, respect my particular investment policy summary, and number two, they have to show genuine concern and interest in the particular investments that I want to make. And number three, they should communicate that. So these are three things I would take a look at. The highest legal duty of one party to another. I'm a kind of a grammar Nazi. This is actually a sentence fragment, so I'm not sure what happened to the verb here, but it should be something like, it is their duty to have the highest legal standards of one party to another. And that's a good question. You need to ask your advisor also the question, do you also have the highest moral duty in mind when you speak about this? And what is your moral code? What is it based on? Because no advisor out there acts in a vacuum. There is no fish that do not swim in an ocean, sea, river, what have you. The point is they have an underlying worldview that informs the way that they're going to understand this idea of being trustworthy. And trustworthiness is going to inform the way they think that they need to disclose or non-disclose things to you. Obviously, they need to disclose everything that's materially relevant to your investments. And then the implication or the subtleties of immaterial ideas, though, there is like the idea of managing your portfolio for your benefit, for your preferences, maybe for your convictions about religion, about the planet, about the lack of religion, wherever you are on that spectrum. Do they take keen interest in, again, offsetting their particular biases and agenda to elevate yours in the way that they manage your assets? So it continues on. It's a little bit of a tautology here. So this definition is like very poorly done, only in the sense that it uses the word fiduciary multiple times and the word ethically multiple times to define what a fiduciary is. And of course, this is what's called a tautology, and it leaves us with a vacuum because it doesn't actually fill in the blanks. It just leaves it empty. They don't actually, you need to unpack that, which is why I'm taking the time to do this video to unpack what some of these terms mean. Being a fiduciary requires being bound ethically. So again, this is a stern commitment. Does my investment advisor have an underlying worldview? What do they believe about commitment? This may be seen in the way that they manage their friends, their significant others, their marriages, what have you. But their personal life, the way they manage their personal life commitments will directly influence, will tell you about their underlying beliefs or their worldview about their, morality of commitment. So being bound ethically. So with this being said, if you find that their underlying personal relationships lack fidelity, they don't have a supreme view or put supreme value on commitment and ongoing consistent care in other areas of their lives, then of course this will trickle out in their professional life as well. And I say this as a doctor of this particular topic, in my professional opinion. You cannot disconnect the personal life from the personal. One of the reasons why hiring managers love to look at people's Facebook accounts, see what they're doing on the weekend. Whether they would disclose that or not, of course, is another question. Being a fiduciary requires being bound. So do they have a supreme commitment to, or do they place supreme value on commitment and its enduring value ethically? So ethically means, do they have a moral code to being bound ethically to act in the other's best interest? Because if they don't have a moral code, if they don't have an underlying worldview that supplies them with a moral code, for instance, one of my supreme moral codes is to maximize the importance of others' points of views and their importance. So whether or not I agree with it, fundamentally, part of my worldview includes the belief that, and this informs my moral structure, my morals, is that I have to have a supreme commitment to understand other people's positions, whether I agree with them or not, and to respect those positions, even if they're not my own. So that informs majorly the way that I'm going to handle somebody's money or assets that could have very differing worldview from me, and who could have a very differing moral structure. The key for me, though, is simply that I want them to be free, and I want to be free to adopt their moral code for their assets, because their assets are an extension of their identity. And if it's an extension of their identity, then it must conform to their person. And I am not a god or gods or God, or if you don't believe in any of that stuff, I am not a tyrant or a dictator or any of the sort. I am a servant for their good, for their financial benefit, for taking up their view and with their assets moving that forward. And if I can't do it, if I believe their view is contrary fundamentally to what I believe is good and right in the world, then I have to not take on the account. It can't merely be about growing money at the end of the day. If it's about that, then my supreme commitment is the money, not to my client. So bound ethically to act in the other's best interest. And of course, here the best interest would be those that are expressed by my client mixed with my own fiduciary obligation and morals. And again, I can't go into it because I don't have time. But what are their morals? Where do they come from? So talk to your advisor today. It's been long in waiting, the idea that clients should start investigating what their advisors believe about the world and about what their particular moral structure is. And don't make the conversation religious. This isn't a religious conversation. This is about understanding who they are, maybe their history, and trying to, as the client, trying to understand, will this person be the type of person that's going to really put me first, really put supreme importance on the idea of commitment and ongoing care? Or is this person's sole goal here to grow wealth, period, so that they can benefit their own family and so forth? Not that that's evil in of itself, but in terms of being a fiduciary, you're violating the fundamental purpose of a fiduciary if those are your goals. So this is Dr. Scalise with Felicity Financial Solutions, April 9th, 2020. Hope you're having a great day.